Hey, Cozy Gloves here. I'm wearing a hat, and today we're going to be looking at masking. Masking, have you ever experienced masking? Well, you have. Have you ever been in a room where you were talking and you could not hear yourself over all the other people talking in that same room? You have experienced masking. Congratulations. It's pretty awful. Masking presents a lot of interesting problems and solutions in life. Now, masking is super useful. Now, the reason you couldn't hear yourself is because your voice is of a similar frequency range as everybody else's voice talking around you. When there's enough people in a room, you get like a hodgepodge of that general area of the frequency range. And because everyone else collectively is way louder than you alone, you have a hard time distinguishing yourself from everyone else. Now, there are ways that you can actually talk and change the frequency range of your voice so you'll cut through the crowd better. That's often when we resort to things like yelling to try and combat masking. So let's talk about masking here. Masking is also used for MP3s and other various forms of codec. What it does is it is information we can't hear, and so they will remove it. Now, of course, you can tell that it's been removed. You can actually hear MP3s. You can tell if it's an MP3 just by listening to it. But for now, we are not bashing MP3. We are looking at masking. So there's two kinds. There's temporal masking, and then I believe it's called temporal. It looks like temporal, but I think it's pronounced temporal. And then the other one is frequency masking or auditory masking. Mixing wise, you need to be concerned with both, and hearing wise. Now we're looking at hearing, but let's just look at what masking is. So I have two tones here. I have a tone of 350 hertz and I have a tone of 395 hertz. And masking is most effective when they are close in frequency content. They do not need to be, though. If one is so absurdly louder than the other, it doesn't matter. And we're going to talk about why masking works for your ear in a very broad sense after this. So what we're going to do is masking is basically when you have two tones of similar frequency and content and whatnot, and one is substantially louder. I don't know why I'm doing this. One is substantially louder than the other, and so it blocks out the other tone. So we're going to start off with this tone of 350 hertz. It's going to be quite a soft tone. That's it. And then we're going to mask it out. And you will see the other tone come in and overtake that tone to the point where you cannot even hear that it is there. So I'm going to play it, and here we go. Let me go kind of slow. So actually, now that I think about it, I've got a note thing here, so we'll use that. So if you're listening really closely, you can still almost hear that it's there if we turn it up even more, but I'm not going to do that to you. And so this is a problem. Now, I'm not going to play for you any more examples because there are like endless examples. Just turn up the music in your room and try talking at the same volume level. Your voice will be masked by the music. Go to a busy place with lots of people. You'll be masked by all the noise going on around you. It's called masking. So that's frequency masking. When two frequencies of similar, it works better, of course, if they're closer in frequency range. You'll have this phenomenon. Now, if we get too close, we'll actually end up with beats. But we've already talked about those. Now, the other type is temporal masking. So you can have forward masking and backward masking. Basically, what it is when a transient sound hits, which we know that a transient is a moment of excitement. When some sort of spike in audio happens, we can actually mask things that come before or after. So I have two sounds here. I have a kick and I have a clap. And you notice that it is softer. It's got to be softer for this to work, because if they're of similar amplitude, then this isn't really masking in that sense anymore. So they have to be of different amplitudes for this to work. Now, what we're going to do is we are going to play them together, and you tell me if you can hear the clap. I can't at all. And so you notice that the clap actually happens a little bit after the kick. If we move it a little bit before, like say up here, check it out. You still can't hear it. Now, if we move it up just a bit more, Now I can hear it. I can officially hear it. It's now obvious to me. Now, if we move it back some, that's pretty easy to hear if we move forward. And now it's getting a little harder to hear. And as we move it, it's being pretty much masked at that point. And what this is so we could tell that this moment here is actually masking this moment. It happens at different times. This MP3s will take advantage of this big time too. So this is really, really important because if you're doing some drum work and stuff, you want to be aware of phenomena like this because what you're doing may not even matter. Now, if we increase it in volume, you have no problem, right? And they're of very different frequency range. This is, which is kind of an interesting deal, but if we have this one down, let's say that's the volume we want that at, maybe it's our hi-hat we're mixing. We just want to be aware of these things. Now, forward masking can occur, I believe it's up to 20 milliseconds before the initial transient hit. So it's not a super big range, only 20. Backwards masking can occur up to 200 milliseconds after. So normally it's not an issue, this type of thing, but you can use this to your advantage to mix sounds in really compelling ways. So if we can use this as sort of an intro, and the rest of this part will be lost to this transient. So it's quite an interesting deal, and we can go the other way. If we turn this one way up and turn this one way down. Now, their frequency content is so different that this doesn't have a low end. This has some high, but this doesn't have that much low. So if we move this, let's see how much we can mask it. Whoops. I think that's the most we'll get out of this particular example. So the fact that they're so far apart in frequency content will help. But that's temporal masking, and that is frequency range or auditory masking. Now, if you're doing something with, like, I don't know, you have some singers going on, and at the same time you've got a string section playing, you're gonna encounter masking, where if some singers are singing so softer and the string section is so loud, they'll block each other out. So what people will do is they'll grab an EQ and they'll create a dip. So let's say that this EQ represents the strings and they want to hear the singers pop through, and singers, we're going to block out this range for the singers. And let's say that we want the higher end to have some string and then the lower end to have some string. So we'll leave that. And so this would be the singer EQ, and then the string EQ maybe look like something like this. Or that would be the string EQ, and then, I'm sorry, back up. I've confused myself. Okay, in the strings, we would put a hole there and we would boost these parts. That would be the string EQ. The singer EQ, we'd actually just leave the same. We wouldn't have to really mess with the singer. Some people would probably even boost a little bit right there. It depends on how many elements you have going on in your mix at that moment in time. You may consider automating stuff. And you know about this from the last video, and you're aware of combination tones and all the other implications that go along with this movement. So EQ movements, there's a lot to think about if you want to. It's not that complicated. You just do what sounds good, and eventually you get just an intuitive feel for it. But it's also good to know all this extra stuff so that you know exactly what's happening, why things may sound the way they do. Now you may be wondering, why does masking work? And I'm going to give you just some really basic terms. In your ear, we remember from the videos of the anatomy videos earlier in this series, we talk about the mechanics of the ear a little bit. And one of the things in your ear are these things called stereocilia, the little hairs that fire off neurons. Well, they have to fire off neurons, and it gets a little complicated, but basically each one of these hairs has what's called a critical bandwidth. They are frequencies that these hairs are more responsive to. And if these hairs can be overpowered by other frequencies in that same bandwidth, and so if one is being so overstimulated by a particular frequency, i.e., it's masking the other frequency, you will only send a nerve impulse. You only send your hair will only send an impulse saying it heard that one frequency. It's not able to send a signal to your brain saying that it heard both. So basically, these hairs are moving. The liquid, it goes through your ear. Sound enters your ear, moves the ossicles, hits your oval window, comes in, moves the liquid, and then it moves these hairs. And depending on the frequencies contained in that movement, if one is substantially louder, it will move one hair so much that it will override other hairs around it and cause you to hear that tone. Now, that's not exactly how it hears, but it's fine for understanding. It's not exactly how it works, but it's fine for understanding how it works. So anyways, that's why masking works. That's the sort of a little bit behind the scenes of what's actually going on. Your ear, it's a mechanical problem. It just doesn't fire off neurons in a way that can tell you that it's hearing both those frequencies since they're so close together in that same critical band. And that's a term that gets tossed around with combination tones as well. There's a couple other terms that I've deliberately left out just to keep things simple, since this isn't like an audiology course, and I don't know enough about that subject anyways to be teaching it. This is just basic, interesting things to know as a producer, so that when you're doing this, you'd be like, oh yeah, I know the phenomena that's going on behind this. It's kind of cool to know. So yeah, so that's masking in a nutshell. Super, super useful on encoding wise. Now, the encoding thing, what I'm talking about is they mess with when they encode and they remove this information, it's generally not noticeable. The amount of reduction they get for the quality they get is incredible. They use a lot of tricks to remove information that we can't hear. So, for example, in that previous example here, they would just get rid of this, or at least they would use substantially less bits to represent this piece of information, because we can't hear that piece of information anyways. It may as well not be there. And that's the philosophy of the MP3. Now, this can mess up your high end. That's how you can hear an MP3. You just listen to the high end of an MP3 and you can tell. So if someone converts a bunch of MP3 to WAV files and then tries selling them, you can tell just by listening to the high end. And we'll be looking at ways to tell that apart later. And there's tons of other cool YouTube videos for that. But that's that. If you have any questions, let me know. Subscribe, support me on Patreon, and have a blessed day.